My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. First, James encourages us to learn to listen. So here's the problem. Most of us will listen to somebody until we disagree with them. From that point on, we don't hear another word because we're doing two things. Number one, we're formulating an argument in our head. We're thinking about what we're going to say in rebuttal. You know it's true. And number two, we're waiting for the person to hesitate or just breathe so we can jump into the conversation with our point of view. It doesn't help. We need to learn to listen. Or as James says it, be quick to listen. And just hearing the words is never enough. You need to be quick to listen to what the other person is really saying. A man and his wife were watching one of those TV gossip shows like Access Hollywood or something. And the reporter was gushing about a Hollywood power couple. The husband had been caught in an affair, but the wife said she was not going to seek a divorce. She was committed to stick with him and work it out. And the man sat quietly, turning this over in his head. Finally, his wife asked him what he was thinking about. He smiled at her playfully and he said, I was just wondering to myself, if I ever had an affair, would you divorce me? The woman said, oh, heavens no. You don't divorce a dead man. You need to really hear what people are saying. But the fact remains, we must learn to listen. You know, it turns out that learning to listen to others, check this out. Learning to listen to others involves one of the most crucial, central tenets of being a disciple of Christ. I'll prove it. In order to listen, really listen to what somebody else has to say, you have to practice no small measure of humility. Pride says what I think is more significant. Humility says what you have to say is important. Pride says I have all the information I need to render a right judgment. Humility says I don't know everything. Pride says the only thing that matters is my point of view. Humility says if I shut up and listen, I might learn something. Pride says the only thing I care about is being right. Humility says keeping the peace and being decent to each other might prevent hard feelings that will damage our relationship. It's sometimes really hard to be quick to listen. It's hard to listen to people, but people feel respected when you really listen to them. They feel important when people listen to them. James is straightforward on this thing. It's not an optional suggestion. He says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen. You know, one of the worst things that Christians do is allow themselves to get into church fights. Of course, the obvious costs include old friendships destroyed and hurt feelings and a weakened witness in the community. Not so obvious is the fact that those fights, they sometimes start small, but they will often lead to church rifts and even church splits. The main body, once unified and strong, becomes divided and weak. We see it a lot in rural settings. I'm from a very rural area, and we see lots of churches. We probably have twice as many churches as we ought to have because so many churches split. Manpower and resources that used to be focused on outreach and caring for others now has to be redirected to surviving the tempest and soothing the hurting and trying to keep the lights on and the doors of the church opened in its newly weakened state. I'll tell you a true story. The church I serve was only 9 years old when I arrived there back in 1987. It had originated from one of those church splits we were just talking about. And only 5 years after that church formed, the people got mad at each other again, and they split a second time. I was 27. I thought I was smart. The first week I was there, I went into the local 7-Eleven for coffee. And this is my first week in this little small town. I'm waiting in line to pay. There are two ladies behind me. And remember, this is a small town. I wanted to know if people knew about the church. You know, what was our footprint? What was our... You know, how visible were we in the community? So I turned around and I said, pardon me, ladies, but I'm looking for the Rappahannock Church of Christ. Would either of you happen to know where it is? Well, one lady and the guy behind the counter at 7-Eleven, we were 3 miles away from the church. The guy behind the counter, one of the ladies said, well, we've never heard of it. And I wasn't sure that was a bad thing, considering the brief history that the church had. But the other lady knew where it was, and she gave me directions. I should have let it go there, but I wasn't slow to speak. I got an idea, and I said, I'm going to church there this Sunday. You should try it too. She turned up her nose and said, no chance of that. I said, why? She said, shoot, those people can't even get along with each other. Why in the world would I think they'd ever get along with me? My people don't like it when I tell that story, but they need to hear it. My point is that some of the fights and the disagreements that we have could be avoided wholesale if we would just listen to each other. Learning to listen is such a small thing, but it is so hard to do. Secondly, learn to not talk much too much. And there is so much to say here. How ironic that I'm talking a lot about not talking a lot. Take note of this. Everyone should be slow to speak. It is a fact specifically addressed in the pages of the book of James that the things we say are most of the time what gets us in the most trouble. You know this if you've ever heard of Facebook. In fact, James says in the 3rd chapter of his book, anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. If we could learn when to speak and when to keep our trap shut, we'd be perfect people, James says. Oh, indeed. 30th President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge, was famously known as being a man of few words. He held his tongue until he was sure he was saying the right thing at the right time. He was kind of the opposite of President Trump. And I can say that because I voted for him. Twice. Trump, not Coolidge. Anyway, he was so silent that the members of the press behind his back used to call him Silent Cal. It's a great story about him that I love. It was a dinner party at the White House, and a young lady was honored to be seated right next to President Coolidge at the table. They had eaten in complete silence for a few minutes, and the young lady said, I guess it's true, Mr. President, that you are a man of few words. Coolidge just looked at her and smiled. A few more minutes went by, and she leaned over and said very quietly, I bet my friends $5 that I could make you say 3 words. Coolidge took a swallow of tea, blotted his lips with his napkin, smiled at the young lady, and said, you lose. Now, Calvin Coolidge was once asked why he was so quiet. His answer was stunningly on point. He said, I've never had to apologize for something I didn't say. So well said. Because we are not slow to speak, most of us have paid a heavy toll. I suspect that some of you, like me, were raised by a loving but firm father who, above all, would not tolerate sass from an impetuous teenager. And maybe, like me, you felt the sting when you spoke before you thought about it adequately. Now, I knew better than to sass, but boy, I spoke too quick so many times that my dad, true story again, hung a little plaque in my room. It stayed hanging in my room. He wouldn't let me take it down. Stayed in my room from my 13th year until I moved out. The plaque said, caution, be sure brain is engaged before putting mouth into gear. Slow to speak. Just for a few minutes here, think of the heartache that could be avoided if all of us were just a little slower to speak. We're not saying be a monk and don't say a word. You hear about the guy who went to the monastery and while he was there he took a vow of silence and he had an opportunity to say 2 words a year. And that was with the head guy. So once a year he would go into the head guy, and the head guy he could say 2 words. The first year he came in and he said, "Food bad." He went back and he was silent for another year. He came back after 2 years to the head guy and he said, "Bed hard." He went back for a year and he came back to the third guy on the third year and he said, "I quit." The guy said, "Well, I'm not surprised. All you've done is complain ever since you got here." Think of the heartache that could be avoided if all of us were a little slower to speak. It doesn't say never speak. It just says be slow to speak. Don't be so quick to jump in. In the workplace, we honor Christ we dishonor Christ with our words. And secretly people say, "Yeah, he's all about his church, but he's just like me. He talks just like me. He's no different." Learn to not talk much too much. In the church itself, I have most certainly been guilty of speaking thoughtlessly and foolishly and disrespectfully. And I got caught. I remember one big regret I have. Every time I think about taming the tongue, I remember a time that I spoke when I shouldn't have. But this lady in our church was gracious. She forgave me. She was a bigger person than I am. And I respect her so much for that. Seriously. I respect her because she's still in worship most every Sunday, because she was big enough to forgive me. In our families, we cause heartache. There's one reason in particular to be so incredibly careful, to be vigilant about guarding your lips when speaking to your children. And it's this: because they believe you. Tell them that they are loved children of God. They'll believe you. Tell them there's a plan for their lives. They'll believe you. Tell them they are priceless gifts. They'll believe you. Tell them they're a huge disappointment. They'll believe you. Tell them they're worthless. They'll believe you. Tell them they're never going to amount to anything. They'll believe you. Tell them you wish they had never been born. They'll believe you. Oh, and husbands and wives, boy, they abuse each other with their words, and they do it in such opposite ways. Of course, there are exceptions, but what I've seen in my ministry is that men don't say enough. They don't tell their wives how much they appreciate them. They don't verbally acknowledge in the gratitude for either the income that their wife brings to the household or the endless jobs that they do every day with very little recognition. Man walked in the door after work, and what he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. There was a day's worth of dirty dishes piled in the sink. Clothes were scattered all over the floor. Cheerios covered the carpet. Toys were everywhere, and the 2 older children had obviously been fighting. Proof was in red scratches and a bleeding lip. The baby had dried spit up on her pajamas. His wife was on the sofa watching a game show, still in her nightgown. His eyes wide, he said, "What in the world happened here?" His wife, never moving her eyes from the TV set, said, "You know how you come home every night and ask me what in the world I do around here all day while you're at work? Well, today I didn't do it." Men don't say enough. Sometimes women say too much. Again, from my experience in ministry and dealing with families over the years, some women just say too much. A man and his wife were pulled over by a state trooper. The trooper asked the man if he always drove so fast. The man said, "I never drive fast, but my wife was yakking on, and I lost track of my speed." His wife then told the officer that she was trying to get him to slow down because he always drives like that. The trooper saw that he was not wearing a seatbelt, but the man explained that it was a one-time oversight, that he always wears his seatbelt religiously. His wife said, "That's a lie. I've never seen him wear a seatbelt." The man turned to his wife and bellowed, "Why don't you keep your big mouth shut?" The trooper looked at the man's wife and said, "Does he always talk to you like that?" She said, "Oh no, officer, only when he's been drinking." That's not even what I mean, though. This is what I'm talking about. A couple was in counseling, and the counselor told them they need to talk through their disagreements. The man said, "I want to, but every time I try to express my opinion, she gets historical." The doctor said, "Don't you mean hysterical?" He said, "No, I mean historical. She brings up every mistake I've ever made in the past." English novelist William Norris gave us a very brief, simple little checklist to go over in our minds before we speak. He said this: "If your lips would keep from slips, 5 things observe with care: to whom you speak, of whom you speak, and how and when and where." Learn to listen. Learn to not talk too much. And finally, check your anger. Splash cold water on your face. Take a brisk walk. Count to 10. Whatever it takes. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. It is never a bad decision to delay your anger, or better yet, dispose of it. And I suppose righteous anger can be beneficial sometimes to give you the resolve to get up and act on something or change your situation. But that even makes sense biblically, because notice James didn't say you should never get angry. He said be slow to anger. And that's great advice. If you are slow to anger, you won't make a rash decision. You won't react poorly in a spur-of-the-moment situation. Excuse me, if whatever happened is bad enough to warrant really being angry, then your slowness to anger will give you time to react appropriately. That neighbor that dumped some trash that blew into your yard again, that neighbor's still going to be there tomorrow. You don't have to yell at him tonight. Slow down. Talk to him tomorrow. Ask him to clean it up. If he doesn't, spray paint graffiti on his house that night. I don't think I have ever made a good immediate decision while I was angry. But I can think of a slew of really bad ones. I've never once been sorry that I didn't explode in an instant. You know, if you're young, I'm going to give you a little bit of wisdom here. I'm not even going to charge you extra for it. Looking back over 60 years of life, I can tell you truthfully that 98% of the things I got furious about did not matter 30 days later. If you've got a little age on you and you know that's true, let me see your hand. 98% of the stuff that I got angry about really didn't matter just 30 days later. So learn to listen. Take time to think before you speak and check your anger. Let me leave you with this. It occurred to me while I was wading through this thing that these are not three disconnected instructions. The first two have a direct bearing on the last one, which is really what James was focusing on. Here's what I'm saying. If you're quick to listen and you listen well, you're less likely to be an angry person, unless you're watching a political TV news show. If you're slow to speak, your anger will be moderated and measured, and it's anger that James is warning us about. It's anger that James is warning us about. And the proof of that is in the very last verse. Here it is. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, for man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. There it is. Man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. It seems to me that God is saying that anger is a good-for-nothing distraction most of the time. And it just doesn't help. It just doesn't help. You know, just for fun, I looked up the opposite of anger. And the opposite of anger is good humor. Not the ice cream. I'm going to try even harder to show the world that knowing Jesus puts me in a good humor. I think that'd be a good idea. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for your revelation to us in the book of James, and all the practical things that are in there. And I pray, and I hope that we, this congregation, those watching online, can pray together that we would learn to be better listeners and slower to speak and slower to become angry, that we might display a good humor that attracts the world to Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.